thanks so much for joining us. I'm Carol Jenkins. The program is Black America, and my guest today is award-winning journalist, author, and professor Kristal Brent Zook. Throughout her career, Kristal's work has explored issues of race, culture, and social justice, bringing attention to stories that challenge us to think more deeply about American history and democracy. And Kristal joins me today with her new book, Tulsa Speaks, a City Council, Reparations, and Race in America. That's a lot.
It's a lot.
It's a lot. And you explore all of it in your book, which tells the story of, you know, I will say, I'll share that I introduced you to my 13-year-old granddaughter, you know, as you were coming in. And what she said to you is, you know, we should study this in school. We were talking about your book. She said she knew nothing about it, you know, and it made it to 8th grade without it ever being mentioned.
Most people know nothing about it. I mean, it's a history that's deliberately been buried. And in Tulsa, you know, there were microfilm newspaper pages that were missing from the library, missing, you know, school textbook pages. I mean, this has been a deliberate effort to erase the history.
So tell us, for those of our viewers who may not know or remember, although I think a lot was unearthed at the 100th anniversary, right. Then people began to say, you know what happened on this spot 100 years ago?
Right.
So tell us, for our viewers.
Yeah, that's when I became interested really in the story. It was the 2021 centennial. A lot of people were talking about it. You remember there was a whole slew of documentaries that came out. Right. LeBron James did one, Oprah Winfrey. I mean, it was on everyone's radar at the time. Tom Hanks published an op-ed in the New York Times saying, I can't believe I didn't know this history.
That it wasn't until 2 years ago that I heard about the Tulsa Massacre. How is that possible? I've heard about Custer's Little Bighorn. I heard about the Alamo. You know, I heard about the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire. You know, I heard about all kinds of disasters in which people died. But I had never heard about this thing that happened in 1921, only 3 years before my dad was born. One of the most successful black communities in America, Black Wall Street, in which everybody was not only burned out of their homes and their businesses, but then driven out of the city limits by an angry mob of, I'm sorry, white people. How is it that this was not taught to me? Because I tell you, at the age of 10, when I was in 5th grade, living in Oakland, California, that would have been a moment of enlightenment for me. And it made me mad. It made me mad that somebody had somehow made an editorial process of what was appropriate for us to learn about our own American history. It made me angry. And it took me 54 years in order to find this out. It's not right.
So a lot of people became aware at that time, and I was following a city councilor, the only black city councilor at the time of the 9 members, who was fighting for reparations. And she, you know, she had a very deliberate, meticulous strategy. The first step is to get an apology. And you see that all across the country in all of these different reparations movements. You see that the apology is the first step. So we started there. I started writing about that. So the apology is for a 2-day massacre. You know, they called it a riot initially, but it's a massacre of at least 300 black citizens who were part of this community at North Tulsa called Greenwood.
And also called Black Wall
Street. It was known as the Negro Wall Street at the time. You had, you know, so many thriving businesses. You had one of the largest hotels in the country, restaurants. You had everything you needed, doctors, lawyers. And that we've seen that play out all across the country, that whenever you have this kind of success, it represents a threat, right?
So we're talking essentially what is called Tulsa now, but then was Greenwood, the black community.
Greenwood is the smaller community within Tulsa.
Right.
But it's North Tulsa, that's the North Tulsa community. And that's the community that's represented by Vanessa Hall Harper, District 1
Right,
city
who was,
councilor.
yeah, as you cover so well, the one black council member who
Yes.
said, you know, something has to happen here.
Yes.
And what happened on that day was the entire town was burned down.
The entire town was burned down. It's an interesting history because just recently, just in a couple of years ago, the DOJ, Department of Justice, actually issued a report after a lot of lobbying, you know, asking for this official investigation. They issued a report that actually said it was worse than what we thought it was. This was a planned military-style attack on this community. And
So
so
over the 300 dead, and they are
More than
still
300.
digging up bodies, coffins, whatever, as recently as last year, right? I mean that this is, so they're still unearthing the devastation of it. So we know about the dead, but they burned down all the houses. There were 10,000 people living, I mean, who had no place to stay.
right, people lived in tents for months and months. You know, we don't talk about that part of it, that people were displaced, relocated, left the city, never returned. You know, all of that fortune that they had built was gone, and they had to start somewhere else.
And all over an accusation that a young black man had committed some offense. So there were
An offense.
hundreds dead, thousands homeless, and their lives totally wrecked. And it was an incident that sort of disappeared. Like this city never existed, and this incident never happened.
Right.
For 100 years.
And you know, that's usually how it plays out, that there's an accusation of, you know, a black man assaulting in some way a white woman. In this case, it was in an elevator. The headline was incendiary, and it was meant to stir up trouble and get people out there. And, you know, that headline was torn and disappeared for a long time, but we know that that's what started the massacre. And we also know that it was probably planned because that was an area of land that the white power structure wanted, and the city wanted, and ended up taking.
They took it, right?
I mean,
so you're there. You're during the 100th commemoration of this tragedy. You see that there is movement, or should be movement, for what? An apology and reparations.
right. So Vanessa Hall-Harper, Councilor Hall-Harper, fought for this apology, which was an interesting process in itself because she needed allies among the council, and at that specific moment, she was able to get a few allies. So they had the numbers they needed to push this through, and they had the centennial. They had the world watching Tulsa. So that was the reason it passed.
And celebrating the then 3 survivors, 3
Right.
living people who had been there, witnessed it, told their stories.
Right.
And I think we just have one who is still alive.
One
now
is
in
still alive.
2026.
Right, right. But the apology is interesting because even that was a struggle. You know, many counselors were uncomfortable with it, didn't want to see it passed. They asked questions like, well, why does the B in black have to be capitalized? Or
Right.
why is there a mention of Jim Crow laws here? Of course, that was the first law passed in the state. But within that apology, there was this clause that the city would commit to repair. And that's really key because, you know, Councilor Hall-Harper was able to get that through, and now you have a foundation. And we see that there are more than 200 local reparations initiatives all across the country in different cities, not at the federal level, right?
Sure.
But different cities are moving forward on this, and they're finding that one of the first steps is an apology, because then you can build on that.
And so what does Tulsa, current Tulsa, say in terms of apology?
So current Tulsa is under the first black mayor elected, Monroe Nichols. Last year, he had what I call a microphone drop moment on June 1st, which was declared, you know, a citywide holiday. So Mayor Nichols announced a historic private trust of $105 million for reparations. So that's the first time we've actually seen, anything like that happen in Tulsa. He also reopened the Graves investigation. He also put thousands of city documents online, made them public, and that, they had been fighting legally for those documents to be made public. So all of that together was like, wow, this is a big move. The fund is private funds, though, and that's important because in the end, Councillor Hall Harper would not have been able, most likely, to get the 5 votes needed to use public funds to pay for what the city participated in. The city itself isn't paying for the damage that it did.
So it's private funding.
Yep.
And it also doesn't go to any survivors or individuals. It is for the general rebuilding of Black
Right.
Wall Street and some nonprofits, whatever. How does that work? What do we do with $106 million?
Yeah, that's the big question, right? Because as of June 1st, this fund, so 1 year later, this fund is operational. We're told it's operational. Everything is set up. We don't know how much of those funds have been raised, or at least I haven't heard how much has actually been raised, or exactly how it'll be distributed. That process seems to be an ongoing process that's going to take a while.
So there still is a distinct difference between Black Tulsa and white Tulsa.
Yes.
It's sort of like a line that goes through in terms of economic development and all.
Very much.
Talk to us about that.
Very much. And I always start with the disclaimer. I'm not from Tulsa. I don't know
Right.
anything about Tulsa. I'm from California. But I was attracted to this story because I think Tulsa is like a case study for the rest of America. I mean, Tulsa is us, right? If these 9 city council members could find a way to do repair in this city, which is one of the worst instances of domestic terrorism in our country ever, right? Then the rest of us maybe have a pathway forward. That's the way I saw it. So, I'm an outsider, but I'm looking at it as an outsider, and I'm seeing, well, this whole process started because the city council was able to, going back a little bit, to push forward the equality indicators report. This was massive. It showed that there were, disparities in infant mortality rates, in the just mortality rates in general for Black Tulsans, huge disparities in policing, arrests, sentencing, all that. And so the fact that you had this report in black and white, going back a few years, started to move the council forward to say, okay, we need to talk about this. We need to look at this. And that's how a few of the councilors were able to really begin the conversation about an apology.
Right. Well, first they had to acknowledge that it happened,
Yep.
which no one wanted
No
to
one
do
wanted
there,
to do.
and or to take responsibility for it. And then I love the Beyond Apology Commission that the mayor set up. So
Yes.
what happens after you apologize and you say, all right, this happened here and we're sorry,
Right.
to some extent, now what?
Exactly. And, that's that little clause in the apology that said we're committed to repair, which is such an important clause. And I can see why some people might not want to apologize because they know that this, now commits them. So the Beyond Apology Commission was created by the previous mayor, and they made a recommendation. They said, we're going to follow the model of Evanston, Illinois, right, which was the first city in America to implement reparations in 2019. Evanston, Illinois implemented a very specific program for housing reparations for discriminatory practices from 1919 to 1969. Very
Wow.
specific, right?
Right.
And so it was successful in many ways because it was so specific. It was $25,000 for housing, renovation, improvements, mortgage for those who qualified, right? And so the Beyond Apology Commission said, well, we're going to follow this model. This is a great model. Why don't we recommend housing
as the way to go, right?
As a way to go, and they recommended that to the mayor. So in comes Mayor Nichols,
The first black mayor.
the first black mayor,
Right.
and he agreed with the Beyond Apology Commission's recommendations. The problem is there's no political will to use taxpayer money for this, right? And you don't have the 5 votes on the council that he needed. You might have 4,
Right.
but you didn't have 5 to get this through. So that we assume that housing piece will come with the private fund that he's created.
Right, right. And so as you track how much money goes and how far will 100 and what was the number?
5 million.
105 million take you for
Yeah.
Black Tulsans reparations. And you know, so many people are attempting the reparations. My church,
Yes.
has a committee, talking about but it's this thing of, am I specifically going to give you money to make up for your status in life, or am I going to look for some, ethereal, how do we make things better for everybody in this class?
Yes.
I'm
That's the conversation that we're having
Right.
all across the country.
right. Every day somebody is talking about reparations, and we haven't been able to figure it out yet.
And it's not a popular term, but even among some Black Americans, the idea of cash payments is not popular, right?
Right.
It's not. The majority of Americans don't like that idea. But, reparations can mean a lot of different things. Look at Evanston.
Right.
Look at the housing, a specific program for specific injustices, right? There are scholarship programs. I mean, one of the survivors talked about how after the massacre, what she was, I don't remember, 5th grade, 6th grade, she didn't go back to school.
Ever.
No,
So-
she started cleaning houses eventually.
Right. And so that's the generational,
That's the generational wealth. that-
impact on education,
Yeah.
housing. So we talk about 2 of them.
Right. Right. There's scholarships, there's all kinds of other things that reparations can mean, right? And I think that's what I'm fascinated by is all of these other movements that I started to see fairly late in writing the book, because I was so focused on Tulsa. But then I realized, look at this, in California, in my hometown in Santa Monica, there's been a very recent, huge fund that the city council unanimously voted for, a $3.5 million fund to restore, well, it came out of a lawsuit
Right.
from somebody who had beachfront property
Yes,
taken
exactly.
away from them.
Right.
Yeah.
Right,
in,
right.
in like 1958. He was going to build an ebony beach club. And he had support. He had Nat King Cole supported it. He had 2,000 members already lined up. And the city took it away.
Just took it away.
Under
Right.
eminent domain. So these cases are, all across the country. And out of that case, the surviving daughter of Silas White got her $350,000 settlement. But out of that came the $3.5 million fund that's one of the largest of its kind for, a city to commit to. And that just happened this year.
Right, right. But again, it came out of acknowledging that it had actually happened,
Right.
I mean, it's just miraculous farmland, housing, all disappearing from Black ownership all over the country for many, many years.
Right.
So retracing those steps. I was interested, it's a step aside, but when Pope Leo just apologized for the Catholic Church's cooperation in enslaving so many people, I think to me that was like another a part of Tulsa. Let's acknowledge, that this actually happened.
Right. But you're right, churches have been doing this for many, many years. In Tulsa, there's an Episcopal, I think, church that even had its own reparations fund.
Right. That's what our church is right now. They haven't figured out how to do it yet, but consistent meetings taking place, and they say,
Right.
Carol, when are you coming to the reparations meeting?
Well, now there are these best practices that are in place. Robin Ruth Simmons has an organization called First Repair. She was the impetus behind the Evanston movement. And so her organization sort of tracks movements all across the country. I mean, there are universities, right? Georgetown, all over.
Rachel Swan's work, in exposing the Catholic Church's participation.
Yes, yes. So there are private movements, and there are public, city, some county. California is the first state to actually make a huge step forward as a state. But a lot of these are municipalities that are, which is what I find interesting. It's people talking to each other at that local level, where you can still talk to each other across party lines and have these conversations.
Right, but so you have that going on a certain level, and on another level, you have extraordinarily bold actions against Black Americans.
Yeah.
So talk to us about that dynamic where it is clear that white supremacy is something that is indulged in this country.
Yeah, well, your granddaughter was right. In a lot of states, as we know, states have banned what they call critical race theory, but which is really just the teaching of history and facts in a lot of cases. And they've actually said, we don't want our white students to feel bad.
Right.
To feel badly. That's the actual language they're using. We don't want them to feel guilty for something they didn't do. So we're not going to teach this. So you have this barrier in Tulsa and all across the country where, now teachers are being, and librarians are being persecuted for even teaching this material. The chair of the Beyond Apology Commission, Kristal Williams, has created a program called Black History Saturdays. And she gets members of the community, and I think it's once a month,
Right.
for an all-day Black History
Right.
lesson. And she has funding from National Geographic, I believe. She's created a huge movement there. So she's very busy in Tulsa.
Right,
She's doing
right.
a lot of different things, but she's also the chair of Beyond Apology.
So you were just there for the launch of the book, and you were at the surviving church. Was that the only structure that survived the massacre, the
Yes.
original Tulsa massacre?
Yes, it's called Historic Vernon AME because it is the only structure that survived. People in the community hid in the basement for 2 days. And when you go, they offer tours. This is also Kristal Williams, who's
Right.
she's in the church. She's everywhere.
Right.
But when you go on these tours in the basement, and you can actually see the nails, how the fire burned through, but the structure survived. And you can feel what it felt like to be hiding there for 2 days. There was bombing from above. The first incident we know of domestic bombing on a community. I mean, that's a whole other story, but people are constantly asking that question. How did these planes drop bombs? Is that a planned attack? Which is why many people think, yes, it was.
Do you think that could happen again in this America?
Personally, I do. I think anything could happen if we're uneducated. And if we, the less we know about our history, the more that gets blocked off and the more it gets distorted and misrepresented. And as you know, our press is in a desperate state right now. We're under attack. Then yes, because that's how, right? That's how dictators operate, by a lack of people not understanding, people not having education about the past and about history. So
what are you teaching your students about how to grapple with all of
Question.
this? Right,
I think we've talked about this
Yeah.
before. The media literacy classes that I
Right,
teach
right.
at Hofstra are very interesting because most young people get their news from social media and they're not even sure who the source is. They're not looking to see if this is a legitimate news source. They just see it. It could be anybody.
Right,
Right.
right.
And so we talk about that. My students are, what I love about that class is that they do realize, by the end of the semester, they do realize that their own practices are detrimental to their own understanding of the world. It may not change everything because a lot of them realize, oh my goodness, I scroll for 5 hours a day. That's bad. But they don't know how to stop it exactly.
Right. Well, interestingly, I must be a tremendous offender because now my phone says to me, "You've been scrolling for quite a while. Do you think
want to
it's time
stop
for a break?" I mean, I'm thinking like, "Wow," and I'm saying, of course, no, I want to keep going. Thank you, but it's true. But what about the whole reshaping of the media now? It's like, what I say when we're seeing now all of these people getting fired. In the one sense, I say, oh, now other people understand what Black people have been through, for eons, because usually we're the ones getting fired. But now they're firing the white people. The reporters are getting fired, and it's like, oh my goodness. And they, by the way, are shocked because they've never, in some instances, experienced this. No, I don't like you. You're not fitting my purpose. You need to leave. And these are the established correspondence reporters who've been doing legacy news.
And they're under attack. But I do want to say, when you're scrolling, there's a difference, right?
Yes.
Because if you see something, you're going to, as a seasoned journalist, you're going to say, well, who created this message? That's the question we ask in media literacy. Who created this message? And you're going to see who your source is, and are they credible? Because it comes as second nature, right? You know how to ask those questions. This generation and my students don't ask those questions. So they're taking in too much information. There's an overload, right? And they don't know where it's coming from, and they don't know who to trust. So that's
Right.
the big problem right now.
Right. Well, I recommend that everybody read Tulsa Speaks. It's just the research that you've done in terms of, the almost incremental movement forward, what it takes, and especially that you point out that it's on a local level. Most of us have been so, looking at the federal, the state.
Yeah.
But it's what's going on in those city council.
City council. And can I say one more thing about that city council?
Sure.
I was really pleased to interview in depth 2 Republicans, one Black, one white. And I've never had those kind of in-depth, really deep conversations with Republicans, public servants who it's not that they would vote for reparations.
Right.
They probably wouldn't. But they explained in the book their position, their experiences, their thoughts, their beliefs. And I really value that because I think the Tulsa and the book can be a model for the rest of us.
Right. Well, hopefully you're right, that it will be the model and we'll move forward. And hopefully Tulsa will not happen again.
Or at least have the conversations that we need to have.
It is called Tulsa Speaks, a City Council, Reparations, and Race in America Today. Thank you so much for being with us. It's a must read. And thanks for joining us. I'm Carol Jenkins. The program is Black America. We'll see you the next time. Kristal, thank you.
Thank you.